Sheila here with Sirius Dallas Moon, and speaking about this Aries stellium, so we have currently Saturn, Neptune, Sol in Aries, Chiron in Aries, Aries in Aries. Mercury is making giant steps towards Aries, and Mars is still in Pisces, about to ingress to Aries in the coming days. Now, sidereal astrology colleagues like Krasti Atasio note that Mars is invisible now. Sidereally, by the way, Mars is ingressing to Pisces, but I'm working with tropical astrology, and when from tropical astrology perspective, we're seeing an upcoming stellium in Aries with the ruler Mars invisible. Now, invisible planet, any planet, and when we don't see it in the sky, basically gives us the more esoteric or the more philosophical teaching of that planet. By the way, only when Mars was invisible, I was sitting with my parent in the sun, and they were like, well, they're going to take all the ammunition on Iran, and then if they're going to attack us, what are we going to do? And so there was a complete shift also in wartime, and I have a natal ninth house Mars. Um, but that was the time where suddenly I could make conclusions that weren't available when Mars was visible, or when Mars was, I don't know if Mars is preparing to be invisible, but this transition is a different sort of Mars. Now, Mars is going to be ruling over an entire stellium, which means that it gives a flavor to the Aries stellium that is more philosophical and more esoteric. And if Mars is strategy, we're going to see into the non-visible aspects of strategy. Non-visible war or non-visible strategy of war is going to be very visible with invisible Mars. Now I see in the air a lot of stressed people. Because the parts in the astrological community that were working with the Epsteins, profiting off of MK Often, putting people in hospitals, using dark occult, trying to jail people that basically weren't joining the trafficking ring. Profiting off of the targeting of people, and those things creating sacrifice of astrologers, and basically undermining the entire astrological vocation. And so this is just one example out of many. Because to begin with, people turn to astrology unless they're like a second generation astrologer and so on. But to begin with, people turn to astrology when something failed to um, explain the world scientifically and usually in a very practical way. So it can be people that were going to psychology, and the psychologist was Epstein, let's say. And they were like, okay, there are attachment patterns that are very important, meeting our needs, but there are things where maybe the astrology can explain. And or even people that try to do business coaching and even reality creation manifestation, and then they're like something tries to mess up with the manifestation. By the way, this is how I came to astrology, because I was like, certain things manifest slower. And it was actually Ksenia Moore that began to talk about manifestation and the planets. And from her, I realized that, oh, if something is, let's say, related to Saturn, it's going to take time to manifest it. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. And then I began to look into astrology. Um, I even had an interview with an astrologer that did horary astrology regarding questions of gender. This is an astrologer that was trafficked because they talked about sex work is work, which is what people that would be tortured would and trafficked would basically be forced to say. And here is the drama, because people were tortured. Sometimes the torture itself, the objective was to get people to be pansexual and not demisexual. So it's both pansexual, but they wanted to people to be not pan-romantic or pan-erotic, or sometimes they would need pan-romantic or pan-erotic for extortion calls, but it would always be in a way that the person would be um, suddenly cut off because they would be trafficked and used as honeypots. I was tortured in 2007 in no touch torture because I disagreed with a perspective that said that we can set our mind to have sex without love. I was basically raped, became dissociated. There was no psychology, there was no nothing. Um, and the person became dissociated as well because they were thinking, oh, that they were misleading me in a certain way. I was like, no, you were violating my sexual boundary. I told you that I'm not a person that is. And they were really into brotherhoods and stuff like that. So, very likely they were raped and dissociated as well. And it could have prompted alcohol drinking. Although coming from a culture of drinking, it is even in Germany, people can getting drunk in Germany is considered, and they were consuming alcohol. I don't think other stuff, but alcohol, in a way that they were predisposed to be sensitive to, which um, and and the rage probably resulted from some sort of ritual abuse. And there was really nobody to talk to, nobody for either of us to reach to consultation, that because those junctures were set to keep both of us in perpetuating traumatizing cycles. It was actually through the internet that I would see that people, let's say even borderline, would use radical acceptance. Then I began to practice radical acceptance, and then I was informed of misplaced arousal, that is basically the attempt of the body to smooth over mental and for some people, physical pain. Now, then I was exposed to the notion of PTSD, and I noticed from veterans that people told me, people that there was a person who was a veteran, was actually an American veteran, and he told me that because he doesn't feel guilty about what he's done, he doesn't have PTSD. Um, but then I would learn that being active about the subject would be able to help, and I saw that there was nothing that facilitates, because I was looking to curate and I did not have a wording, and I said, well, it kind of reminds of the symptoms that people that were raped go through, so maybe the things that help people that were raped might help me, which would be an introduction to discovery that there is no actually remediation to recovering from rape, in which I would be of the people that would begin to develop, which only now as I speak I understand that it got me targeted even back then, even before the Me Too. Because why? Because curate healing from rape drops any type of sex trafficking, any type of non-sex positive work, even if it's not sex work, even if it's waitressing, even if it's the boss that thinks that sexual harassment is a domination practice that he was getting used to in the brotherhoods, because men will also be sexually harassed and they had to dominate to not be dominated, which of course affected their ability to have relaxed arousal or provide for the space which would make a woman willingly, consensually sexual with him, because that would invoke relaxed arousal. And then women were not attracted to them, no matter how attractive, no matter how charming, no matter how rich, no matter how charismatic, no matter how many courses they took in how to communicate with women, which would teach them trauma bond. And also the women. I had a friend who was a relationship coach, and she did apprenticeship on me. And it's just always be mysterious, never reveal too much, never completely kind of like let go with a man. And I'm like, how am I supposed to orgasm? Like, how am I supposed to? And not only that, I use the term cervical orgasm, which requires relaxed arousal and is also kind of like the embodied spiritual. Now, I did not know a thing about the baggage that people older than me had about the pressure to orgasm. And she snapped, because immediately I could make the connection between don't ever, like, always be mysterious to your man, always this, always that. And I was like, I felt tight in a way that cannot orgasm. My cervical muscles couldn't contract naturally because they didn't get to relax. Just as I was listening to this explanation, I was like, something's missing. And then everybody thought I was too sensitive. So I began to think that I'm an alien. And then when people around me would say sex work is work, I was like, well, I'm probably an alien. Now, why not? Why am I saying all of that? Because the people within that have intuition during the Mars phases where is invisible begin to track back. And Mars rules sexuality, Mars rules strategy, Mars rules business, Mars rules war. I also had a notion around business and money making that, well, people were believing that it's love or money. Um, Having my original ideas or money. And to me, it was very clear that it's the opposite. That is something that is unified, and without it, nothing, no success is fulfilling, and no money is wealthy, and no love is loving because um, what is okay? What is that so-called pudam is something to do with the abundance of the sensual pleasure and the benevolence and the energy. Now, when all of that compounded, there were attempts to collapse that, and this is where we are today, where the attempts to collapse the growing noses of people create a friction that causes people to require even more sovereignty. It's kind of like, and I noticed, for example, particularly around the Me Too, but also later timelines, the more there were attempts to silence, sometimes even I would say, okay, maybe that's too much to say, and then I would, I don't know, not post, let's say, a video, or somebody would try to make me not post a video, and then I would record something was even more deep and profound, kind of like even worse, and and so those that were thinking that the telos would go to, oh yeah, the people will calm down from whatever, it was only going the other direction, and this is where this stellium with Aries, ruled by an invisible Mars, is so beautiful in evoking the profound awareness of the hidden facets and having sovereignty there. For example, the use of technology. If I take just the case of Tanya Khun, okay, just to think about what if Tanya Khun today would have been kidnapped because, let's say, she didn't want to sacrifice a child at hospital, or she insisted on registering an unregistered birth. Her voice could be altered. Her moves could be altered. She could suddenly say things that were weird or like kind of like neurodivergent. And she could be, if in the past people that went through rape, for example, would sound incoherent, um, because this is a part of the dissociation and speech challenge. And this is actually a testimony. Then the technology basically can create different voices, different tonalities, forcing a person to look like they're stressed. Those are all, by the way, things that I've experienced with combating nervous system hacking. Now, do you want to tell me that that technology at the time of the kidnapping of Tanya Hu, namely 1993, didn't exist? So why weren't the people that were tending to true crime calling to declassify classified technologies that could have assisted them in tending to these cases? Now, even when people say that, now even the people that use these technologies could be more easily recruited to use these technologies and to commit offenses when they are targeted by these technologies and are seen as the guilty. For example, it was common amongst people that were harmed by what would later be acknowledged as narcissistic abuse syndrome, but it's basically the narcissists would be people that went through ritual abuse in the secret societies, in the brotherhoods, or fraternities and sororities. And it was common that if somebody, let's say, harasses a lady or gaslights or so on, that she should be harassing him so that he would have a restraining order against her. Because in that way, he would be obliged not to come close to her. And the most effective way would be um, to deter them would be to try to stifle them with love. I remember I dated a person, and by the way, he was a lawyer and he liked to represent criminals, but he liked it for the sake of it. Like, he didn't care if a person was guilty or not. He was just interested in his talent to um, do the justification. And we were talking. He told me that he dated a borderline, and she sent bullies to harass him, and so on and so forth. And then, as we continue the conversation, I see that he really tries to control the conversation all the time. Communication was not a healthy communication. At which I stopped the attempt to date the guy, because now I had to be thankful to that borderline girl because because he didn't try to pursue me. Oh, hi from Iran. Mommy, missiles. So, um, the invisible Mars really shows us that, particularly in Aries, the more people are trying to be oppressed, like, not trying to be, the more they try to oppress people, the more, yeah, 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 the more people actually, yes, I'm coming, beat that. The more people actually resist that and ask for even more sovereignty because, and here is the thing, let's say, I don't know, You date a guy, he communicates weird, you say bye to them. And then people say, oh, why are you single? Like, no partner. And then people try to create misplaced arousal by traumatizing. So now you're like, wait a second, what the fuck was that? Because that wasn't something that I want. Oh, okay, that was a trauma response. Okay, so now we define that as, well, I need to have sexuality that I do want, which means relaxed arousal. And now we want another level of sovereignty that in the past we weren't even thinking about. And then there's the use of technology with no touch torture to try to prevent my sleep with attempting to rape me every time I try to go to sleep, to siphon my energy. So now I want sovereignty in the face of technology, which means changing the entire investments. For example, civil pensions in Netherlands stopped investing in Palantir. And now, basically, I want my 401k or my life insurance to not be invested in technologies that traffic either me or others. Which means I want my investments to compound, not on human trafficking. So it's another level of sovereignty where I wasn't even thinking about. And then I'm like, wait a second, who are all these people that are doing that? Well, the growing societies where they have to do treason. And I'm like, oh, that explains why there's no partner. I'm doing shadow work, learning communication skills. There's no partner because naturally I'm more attuned, and even more attuned. And naturally, I can't be with a person who's trained by um, becoming addicted to being a sex offender. ים המלח, בעקבות שיגורים שיצאו פי תמר לפני זמן קצר מאיראן והאזעקות צפויות להיות מופעלות בעיקר באזור באר שבע ודימונה והסביבה, אזור דרום הארץ. זה קורה לאחר כמה שעות של שקט, הירי האחרון התבצע בשעות הבוקר לאזור הצפון. And in this way, okay, hello internet. In this way, there are more definitions of sovereignty that compound to what I do want per each individual. So we're going to pay attention to the conglomerate of planets in Aries that is going to define more and more accurately the layers of sovereignty that we require. And since the world is so profoundly changing, there actually isn't an excuse for those sovereignty requirements to not be met per individual. Finally, an episode that uploads.